The myths of meditation. Today's myth is something I've heard a lot in the eastern countries like India, Japan, but also recently a lot in the West. And this myth is that to properly meditate, you need to run to the mountains or the forests or some other remote place, because as the theory goes, you cannot meditate deeply while still living in the material world. Now, there might be some truth to this, at least for many beginners. When they start meditating, meditation seems so great, so calm, so peaceful, and they want to remain in that calm state all the time. But you know you can't. You have a job, you might have a family, you have to pay the bills, there are a million other things to do. Our parents call, our husband or wife or girlfriend calls. There is stress in relationships, with the boss, with friends, and you feel like, to hell with this, I should just leave this and go meditate in the mountains. Certainly, many Eastern traditions encourage this for a long time. Running away from society and becoming a monk in the Himalayas was the #1 goal for many Indian spiritualists. The Indian culture, as well as other Asian culture, also encourages this myth. And so it is easier to run away from home in places like India, where people will always feed you, than compared to the West, where if you run away from home, you'll be treated as a homeless bum and not given anything. And in parts of America, maybe even thrown in prison. But the temptation still remains to leave this cruel materialistic world and run away to some far-off place to meditate. A place where there is no distraction, no interruptions, where there is nature nearby. There are many problems with this. First of all is money. Living on a mountaintop or in the forest might be a great idea, but there aren't many well-paying jobs in those areas. You will run out of money at some time. But suppose you don't. Suppose you retired early, or you are just plain rich, and you think you can support yourself, living the simple lifestyle for years. There is still a problem. The reason you cannot meditate is not because you live in a materialistic, corrupt, sensualized society. The problem is not out there. The problem is inside you. Even if you were sitting on a beach and it was nice and sunny, but not too hot, and you were trying to meditate, you wouldn't be able to, not for any long period of time. Try it if you don't believe me. All the garbage in your mind, all the anger, the hatred, the shame, the guilt, the feelings of worthlessness, they are all inside of you. And the moment you sit quietly, they will all come rushing up, and you will be forced to either suppress them again or go back to daydreaming about something else. The myth that you can meditate better in some places is just that, a myth. There was an Indian Swami Sivanand. There have been many by that name. I'm talking about one recent one. He taught in the 80s and 90s, I think, died in the early 2000s. So Swami Sivanand used to say, if you cannot meditate while you're at your home, where it is air conditioned, where you can get all the food you want, tea and coffee whenever you want, if you cannot meditate in such a comfortable place, why do you think you'll be able to meditate deep in some forest or mountain where the ground will be hard, it will be cold, and you won't have a coffee maker nearby when you get bored? No video games either. While it is true that being close to nature helps us spiritually, you can achieve that effect by taking a walk in the park, or by walking in semi-wild places. If you have a small forest nearby, obviously it's hard to find purely wild places unless you live in some place like Montana in America or Upper Scotland in UK. Unless you live in a place like that, it's impossible to find a purely wild place. But that's fine. There are many small parks, protected forests, which allow you to walk through them. And these forests have the protected forest have the added benefit that they always have a toilet or an ice cream parlor nearby. So when you grow bored with your meditation, you can go eat an ice cream. So being close to nature helps. But if you give it a proper try, you will find that even in a forest or a park, you cannot meditate for long, because that problem of your mind remains. The thinking that you can run away from the problems of the world is a very dangerous and stupid one. Because wherever you go, the problems will be there. But I want you to have a shift in perception. I want you to change your thinking mode. Don't view problems as problems. The problems in our life are brought along by our own inner self, our own inner teacher. And each one of those problems has something to teach us, if you're willing to learn. You cannot, and I repeat, you cannot achieve enlightenment sitting on some mountain top, no matter what all those ancient Indian texts say. Because awakening or enlightenment is not about achieving some trance-like state. This is a myth I've talked about earlier. Meditation is not about achieving a trance-like state. And most of these people who want to run away from the world go to some forest to meditate. They are all usually trying to reach a trance-like state where their mind is calm and enters some so-called higher level of consciousness. Well, let me tell you, these higher levels of consciousness are fucking useless. It's no use being all high and mighty and enlightened. Ooh la la, I'm in samadhi. When the next second you go to a cafe and you have to wait 5 minutes in the line and you lose it. What's this nonsense? I've been standing here for 2 minutes. Your customer service sucks. Eckhart Tolle tells a story about a Westerner he met in Thailand. This Westerner had become a Buddhist monk. He lived in the forest, slept on the floor, hard floor, did not complain when the mosquitoes bit him, accepted life with calmness, or so it seemed. But then he went to get his visa renewed and he lost it. There was a problem with his form and the Thai refused to renew his visa, and so he screamed at them, shouted at them, screamed at them so much that they had to arrest him. So here was this monk who had achieved perfect peace and calm in the forest, but could not carry that calmness into the real world. And trust me when I say this false calmness is of no use if you lose it at the first sight of problems. It is better, I repeat, it is better to live in the material world and face lots of tiny problems daily. You know, problems with your boss, with your project, your wife, children, and practice being mindful in those small problems. If you can practice being mindful in small problems, it is much easier to be mindful when something big happens. If you suddenly lose your job, your wife or husband leaves you, you'll be like, oh shit, I'm just have to kill myself. But if you have been practicing being aware and calm while you're having small problems, then it is much easier to remain peaceful when a big problem hits. Because calmness or a meditative state is like a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it becomes. That's why It's useful to go to gym regularly so your muscles stay strong, rather than try to run the marathon once a year. Meditation is also like that. Lots of small practices, even if it's only for 5 minutes a day, are more important than a 1 hour session once a week. The material world, even though it looks so cruel and so unfair and out to get us, is the perfect place to check how our spiritual progress is going. Because no matter who you are, how enlightened you are, you will face problems in life. Jesus Christ was killed. Krishna had people hating him throughout his life, and in fact, very few people respected him while he was alive. The Buddha faced opposition, not just from priests, but later on from his own family, who couldn't accept that this person they knew, the child they knew, was now an enlightened master. If all these masters couldn't have a perfect, trouble-free life, what chance do you think you have? It is impossible to live a life with no stress and no problems. The key is not running away from our problems or trying to use meditation as a crutch, as an excuse to enter some trance-like state where all our problems fall away. Because as soon as you return from the trance-like state, the problems will be back there waiting for you, saying, "Hello, here we are. Welcome back. Now let's ruin your life again." You cannot run away from life, and you shouldn't even want to. Meditation is, or awakening. Meditation leads to awakening, and awakening doesn't mean that you have become this holy person who is above the world and no longer gives a shit about the world. I know that's what you have been taught. Now the sign of an enlightened master is one who is completely beyond the world, above the world, as it were. But again, if you look at real enlightened masters, they did not run from the world. Rather, they tried to heal it. Buddha spent his whole time, his whole life, helping others spiritually, starting his community or sangha, and in general helping lift the spiritual level of people. Jesus spent his time helping the poor and the weak and the sick Krishna actually lived in the world as a king and ruled his kingdom fairly. None of the real enlightened masters ran away from the world. And not just because they were above the world or they were too good for it. Real awakening is about realizing that we are one with the universe, which means or which includes everyone else around us. Our bosses, our wives, husbands, parents, children, people we hate, people we love. The being, the inner self that lives in us, also lives in everyone else. And it is a very fake, a false enlightenment that teaches you to reject this world in favor of some out there other world. I know that's what most religions have taught as well. The whole history of religions has been one of running away, either to some heaven or some next life where we can continue our work. But the fact is, there is no heaven, there is no other life. There is just this life, this second, this very moment. We can become awakened in a moment wherever we are, in the forest or in the city, up on the mountain or sitting in an office. To accept that it is easier to become enlightened on a mountain is to accept that enlightenment is about something outside of ourselves. Real awakening happens inside us and is not dependent on outer factors. It does not matter where you are, who you are, what clothes you're wearing, whether you become a monk or you're an accountant. Whether you are a monk who spends his time meditating, or a family man or woman who can find barely the time to meditate. It doesn't matter so much in the larger scheme of things. Meditation is not like training for the Olympics. Spending more hours does not make you better. That's another myth which I've talked about. Just doing it harder doesn't make it better. You can be awakened anytime, any place. And your outer circumstances do not matter at all. Super rich people have become awakened. Poor people starving to death can have become awakened. People in the mountains, people in the cities. Awakening, like I said, is an inner change, a realization that we are not this limited body or mind, that we are not limited by the world of form. If you think you can only meditate in the forest, then you're still stuck in the world of form. Just as thinking that wearing an orange robe and becoming a monk makes you more spiritual. Again, another form of illusion. So yeah, by all means, if you feel like it, every weekend or whenever you can, go to a park or a forest if you have one nearby. Spend some time meditating there. Spend time by the river, by lakes, any other natural place. These places have a natural spiritual power which we can connect with. But this natural power does not make us enlightened. All it does is boost the inner power, the inner strength we already bring to the table. Ultimately, like I've said, awakening happens on the inside. Nothing on the outside can help it or stop it. All meditation is just practice for the real awakening, which happens by itself when the inner being, the inner self is ready. So rather than making grand plans of one day going to the mountains, it is much more powerful to meditate now, even if it is only for 5 minutes, when driving to work or when taking the train back home or when going for a coffee during break. It's better to meditate in these small time periods whenever you can, because like I said in one of the earlier talks, it is not us, the ego self, that awakens, but something else inside of us that awakens, something that is bigger than us. All that we are doing is laying the groundwork for this something bigger to flower or to blossom within us. And this inner self is not affected by the world of form. It is only affected by our level of consciousness, our level of joy and peace and love and kindness that we have. So meditate, doing the work, the inner work, the spiritual work is more important than where you do it or how you do it. And remember, you cannot do it wrong. You cannot meditate wrong. That's a whole myth by itself, that if you're not, which I've talked about, it doesn't matter whether you're sitting with a slouched back, if your back is not straight, or if you cannot sit in lotus pose, or you cannot chant mantras or visualize or watch your breath for an hour. None of that matters. These are all attempts by the ego to take control of the awakening process. Don't let the ego take over the process. And the best way to do so is to continue living in the moment, being aware of who you are, wherever you are. If you're driving a car, be aware of that. If you're walking through the cafe, be aware of that. Be present. You don't need some mountain or forest to achieve awakening. It can happen here and now if you are ready and you've done the inner work. So always, always, always do the inner work. And the best way to do the inner work is to take deep, conscious breaths. So take a deep breath in. Another one. This time we are going to hold. Breath in. Hold. And let it out. Thank you for listening, and may you become awakened wherever you are, however you are. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. If you want a free course on how to contact your inner teacher, your own spiritual guide, the part of the divine who lives inside of you and is guiding your spiritual progress, then please go to my website, thepathtojoy.org. That is thepathtojoy.org. Thank you.